Chapter 1. Abandoned House on Maple Lane. When I was a teenager, my friends and I loved to explore abandoned places in our Vermont town. One rainy afternoon, we dared each other to investigate the old Victorian house on Maple Lane. Neighbors said it had been vacant for years after the last owner left abruptly. The porch boards groaned under our weight as we crept toward the front door. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled stale. Sheets covered the furniture. A layer of dust coated everything. In the living room, we found a stack of newspapers dated 1979. They were stacked neatly, as though someone planned to return. A narrow stairway led to the basement. Without thinking, I switched on my flashlight and went down first. The basement was surprisingly clean, with shelves lined with preserves and a workbench. Against one wall stood a tall mirror with an ornate frame. Its surface was cloudy, but as I wiped away the grime, my reflection sharpened. I saw my friends behind me, their faces pale in the beam of my light. Then, just for a second, I saw another face over my shoulder. It was a woman's face, eyes wide open, watching me through the mirror. I spun around, but there was no one there. The hair on my arms stood up. "We need to leave," I said quietly. My friends laughed it off, until we all heard a soft humming coming from somewhere in the house. It sounded like an old lullaby. We ran up the stairs and back into the living room. The humming grew louder, more urgent. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was running backward. The second hand ticked counterclockwise, and the minute hand had moved back 2 positions. One of my friends touched the face of the clock, and it stopped abruptly. The humming stopped as well. We didn't speak until we were outside again, out of breath on the front lawn. The rain had stopped. When we looked back at the house, a curtain on the second floor fluttered, although every window we saw had been closed. Who was inside that house? And why had it been left to rot? Do you ever wonder what happens in homes after their stories end? Chapter 2. The Forgotten Train Tunnel. When I was 12, my friends and I spent afternoons exploring the woods behind our subdivision. One day, we found a rusted chain-link fence hidden behind bushes. Beyond it was a dark hole carved into the hillside, an abandoned train tunnel. The entrance was bricked up except for a small opening where stones had fallen away. The air spilling from the gap was cool and smelled like damp earth and oil. Someone had spray painted "Keep Out" across the bricks in red letters. Naturally, we crawled through. Inside, our flashlights cut narrow cones through the darkness. Old tracks still ran along the floor, disappearing into a black throat. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, echoing like footsteps. We walked deeper. After 100 yards, the temperature dropped. My breath fogged. Then we heard a low whistle. It wasn't wind. It was the wail of a train. The ground beneath us began to vibrate. Light blossomed far down the tunnel, brightening quickly. We scrambled against the wall as a shape roared toward us. Instead of the roar of an engine, we heard quiet chuffing, as if the train were breathing. The light passed through us and kept going, revealing ghostly passenger cars filled with motionless silhouettes. In one car, I saw someone who looked like my grandfather staring directly at me. When the last car disappeared into the hillside behind us, the tunnel went silent again. We ran home. That night, I told my parents. They exchanged a look and told me I had an overactive imagination. A week later, one of the kids who'd been with us didn't come to school. His mother said he'd gone to live with relatives. When I went back to the woods, the chain-link fence was gone, and the hillside was solid rock. Have you ever wondered if forgotten places can remember you even when the world pretends they never existed? Chapter 3. The voice on the radio. My grandfather left me a box of junk when he passed away. Old photographs, army medals, and a dusty ham radio. On a bored Saturday afternoon, I set the radio up in my basement, strung a wire antenna out the window, and turned it on. Static filled the room. I spun the dial, hoping to pick up distant voices. Most of what I heard were garbled transmissions and faint music. Then, late that evening, a clear voice cut through the noise. "Can anyone hear me?" it asked. The accent was local. "Please, someone, I'm trapped." I froze. "Where are you?" I spoke into the microphone, my voice shaking. The reply came after a pause. "Behind the wall. It's dark. They poured the cement and left us." I felt cold. I asked for a name. The voice whispered a name I recognized. It belonged to a classmate who had disappeared the year before. I ran upstairs and told my mum. She frowned and said I shouldn't play with old electronics. I brought the radio to the police station, repeating what I'd heard. The officer smiled politely and promised to look into it. He placed the radio on a shelf behind the desk. When I left, I saw him unplug it. That night, the voice returned. "They won't listen," it said. I told it I was sorry. The transmission crackled. "Don't let them pour the next wall," it whispered. And then the static came back. In the morning, the local news ran a story about a new wing being added to the high school. They showed cement trucks lined up outside. I tried to tell anyone who would listen. No one believed me. At the groundbreaking ceremony, the principal praised the school's bright future. Has anyone ever told you a secret so strange you couldn't share it without sounding insane? Chapter 4. Eyes in the Cornfield. My aunt's house in Vermont sat beside 10 acres of corn. Every summer, my family visited for a week. We'd run between the rows, the leaves slapping our arms, pretending to be explorers. One evening, as the sun dipped and painted the sky orange, I noticed something moving deep in the field. At first, I thought it was the breeze. Then I saw a pair of eyes reflecting light between the stalks. They were far too high off the ground to belong to a deer. I called to my cousins. They laughed until they saw the eyes themselves. They watched us, unblinking, then disappeared as if whoever they belonged to had crouched down. We ran back to the house, breathless. My uncle chuckled when we told him. "Probably raccoons climbing the stalks," he said. That night, lying on the living room floor, I heard rustling outside the window. I peered through the curtains and saw several sets of eyes in the yard, all at human height. They didn't glow red like animal eyes in headlights. They reflected like glass marbles. The next morning, some of the corn near the house was flattened in wide circles. My aunt shrugged it off as kids playing pranks. Over the next few days, we saw the eyes almost every evening. They never came closer than the edge of the yard, but we felt watched. On our last night, just after midnight, a thudding sound woke us. We crept upstairs to find my uncle standing in the kitchen, shotgun in hand, staring at the sliding glass door. Beyond it, pressed up against the glass, was a face with empty eye sockets, corn silk tangled in its hair. My uncle didn't fire. He just whispered, "Not again," and the figure melted into the dark. We left early the next morning. My aunt sold the house that winter. She never said why. Sometimes, driving past endless fields, I see movement out of the corner of my eye and feel those eyes on me again. Have you ever wondered what grows between the rows besides corn? Chapter 5. The Bus That Never Returned. In the spring of 2002, a school bus in our county vanished. It was Route 14, the long line that wound through the back roads, picking up kids from farms and mountain cabins. One morning it left the bus depot at dawn with a veteran driver and 11 students. It never arrived at the elementary school. Parents called the school when their children didn't show up. The police organized a search. They found tire tracks that veered onto an old logging road, then nothing. For weeks, helicopters hovered over the woods. Volunteers combed through brush. Not a scrap of yellow paint or broken glass turned up. Rumors spread. Some said the bus went into the quarry and sank. Others said a sinkhole opened and swallowed it whole. The driver's family moved away after reporters camped on their lawn. By autumn, the town erected a memorial in the school courtyard with 11 little statues. 10 years later, I was driving home late one foggy evening when I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. The vehicle behind me was large and kept its distance. As I turned onto my street, it followed. I pulled over, heart pounding. A yellow bus rolled past slowly. Its windows were dark. Through the condensation-streaked glass, I thought I saw silhouettes of children sitting perfectly still. The bus number, faded but readable, was 14. The driver didn't look at me as he passed, but I saw his hands on the wheel, bony and grey. The bus continued down the road and disappeared into the fog. I blinked, and it was gone. The next day, the memorial at the school was gone. In its place was a flower bed, as if it had never been there. I asked my parents about the bus. They looked confused. "What bus?" my mother asked. I went to the library and pulled the newspaper microfilms from 2002. There were no headlines about missing children. There were no names. Do you ever feel like you remember something that everyone else has agreed to forget? Chapter 6. The Girl in the Old Photograph. I collect old photographs from antique shops. There's something haunting about strangers frozen in time. Last summer, I found a stack of sepia prints in a dusty bin at a yard sale. One photograph caught my eye. A girl about 8 years old in a white dress, standing in front of a farmhouse. She stared straight at the camera with a solemn expression. Behind her, in the window, a shadowy figure loomed. The seller didn't remember where the photos came from. I paid $1 for the lot and took them home. That night, I propped the picture on my bookshelf. I dreamed about the farmhouse. In my dream, I was standing in the yard. The girl was on the porch, beckoning me. I tried to move, but my feet were rooted. The shadow in the window grew larger and pressed its face against the glass. I woke up sweating. I decided to put the photo away in a drawer. Over the next few days, the girl began appearing in my peripheral vision. I'd walk past the living room and see the hem of a white dress vanish around the corner. I'd hear soft footsteps upstairs when I was home alone. Once, I found small muddy footprints leading from the back door to my bedroom. I compared them to the girl's boots in the photo. They matched. I took the photograph back to the antique shop to return it. The owner looked puzzled. "We've never sold that," he said. I checked my car. The photo was on the passenger seat. I threw it in the trash behind the shop. The next morning, it was on my kitchen table. The girl's face seemed slightly closer to the camera. I panicked and burned it in the sink. The flames curled the edges and blackened her eyes. Smoke filled the kitchen. When the paper turned to ash, I sighed in relief. That night, my smoke alarm went off at 3 a.m. I ran downstairs. On the table lay a singed photograph of a farmhouse. The girl was gone, but the shadow in the window was now standing on the porch. How do you return something that never belonged to you in the first place? Chapter 11. Black Water. Our town's water supply came from a reservoir nestled between green mountains. You could hike to its edge and see straight to the bottom, clear as glass. Then, one fall, the water turned black. It happened overnight. People woke to find their taps running dark. The town issued a boil advisory and sent workers to the reservoir. They reported no signs of contamination. The state environmental agency ran tests. The water was chemically clean. It just wasn't clear. For a week, the black water flowed. People brought jugs to the grocery store for drinking water. Some refused to bathe. Others said the water left a residue on their skin that tingled. When the mayor went on the local radio station to reassure everyone, a caller with a raspy voice cut in. "Stop drinking," it whispered. "It sees you through the pipes." The line went dead. The station tried to trace the call. It came from an abandoned farmhouse miles away. Children started having nightmares about things crawling up from the drain. They described thin fingers pushing through grates. A plumber sent to unclog a kitchen sink passed out after inhaling fumes. He claimed he saw an eye in the trap staring back at him. The night before the water cleared, a fisherman at the reservoir told the sheriff he saw something huge surface, an expanse of black skin, like an oil slick. Then, it submerged without a ripple. The next morning, the water ran clear again. The town celebrated. The mayor cut a ribbon at the treatment plant. Life returned to normal. Weeks later, a neighbor knocked on my door, pale and shaking. "Listen," she said. We turned on a kitchen tap. As water filled the sink, faint whispers rose, too soft to make out. We shut it off, and the whispers stopped. I never drink from the tap now. When I look into a glass of water, I swear I see movement. If you knew something was watching you through something as mundane as a faucet, would you keep living your life like normal? Chapter 12. The Endless Highway. Last winter, I left a late-night shift and took the highway home. Snow had started falling, and I wanted to beat the storm. I merged onto Route 7, set the cruise control and turned up the heat. After 20 minutes, the snow thickened. My headlights painted white streaks. I kept driving, mile markers ticking by. After an hour, I realized something was off. The exit signs seemed unfamiliar. Instead of towns I knew, the signs listed places I'd never heard of. Ash Hollow, Willow's End, Crow's Nest. I tried to call my partner, but my phone had no signal. I decided to take the next exit and turn around. The ramp curved and delivered me onto another highway, identical to the one I'd just left. The snow piled up on the shoulders, but the lane was clear. I drove until I saw another exit. The names changed. Lost Pond, Cemetery Hill, Closed Gate. But the road never ended. My gas gauge dropped. Panic set in. I pulled over and stepped out. The snow muffled everything. There were no tire tracks ahead or behind me. The world felt like a blank sheet. In the distance, I saw headlights approaching. Relieved, I flagged the car down. As it drew near, my relief turned to dread. It was my own car. The driver was me. Same hat, same tired eyes. He stared straight ahead, not seeing me, and drove past. I watched my taillights disappear into the snow. I climbed back into my car, heart racing. My phone buzzed. I had service. The map app showed a blue dot spinning in place in the middle of a blank area labeled unmapped. The fuel light blinked. I closed my eyes and pressed the accelerator. I don't remember how long I drove. I woke up in my driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled. The clock on the dashboard read 4 hours later. My jeans were wet up to the knees. There was fresh snow on the hood, but none on the road behind me. The next day, I checked Route 7. All the exits were the same as they'd always been. Has a familiar route ever taken you somewhere you couldn't explain and brought you back with more questions than answers? Chapter 13. The Reflection in the Pond. There's a small pond in the woods behind my childhood home. We used to skate on it in winter and catch frogs in summer. The water was usually still, reflecting the sky and trees perfectly. One July evening, when I was 16, I went down to the pond alone. The air was heavy with humidity. Mosquitoes buzzed at my ears. I tossed pebbles into the water, watching the ripples. As twilight settled, the surface darkened and turned mirror-like. I leaned over to see my reflection. For a moment, everything looked normal, my face framed by pine branches overhead, my freckles dark in the fading light. Then my reflection smiled. I hadn't moved. A chill ran through me. I backed away. The reflection leaned closer, as if pressing against the underside of the water. Its eyes were slightly lighter than mine. Its smile widened too far, stretching to the edges of its cheeks. It raised a hand and beckoned. I ran back to the house. That night, I couldn't sleep. Images of my doppelganger pressing through the pond haunted me. I told my brother in the morning. He teased me and went to the pond himself. He came back pale, refusing to say what he saw. We avoided the pond for the rest of the summer. In the fall, leaves covered its surface. Winter came and the pond froze. We never skated on it again. Years later, my brother called me after our mother passed away. "Do you think it's safe now?" he asked. To go back. I knew what he meant. We went together. The path was overgrown. The pond was smaller, choked with cattails. We stood at the edge. The water was cloudy. I leaned over. My reflection stared back. No tricks. I felt foolish. Then I noticed something shiny under the surface. I reached in and pulled out a small gold locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of two children who looked like us standing by a pond. On the back was engraved, "Taken 1973, they never came home." Have you ever wondered if there's another you waiting for an invitation? Chapter 14. The Hill That Moves. On the outskirts of town is a round hill covered in wildflowers and scrub. It's a popular spot for sledding in winter and picnics in summer. My grandfather told us never to linger on it after sunset. "Hills move," he said cryptically. We thought he was being superstitious. One evening in May, a group of us stayed late, watching fireflies. The sky turned purple. A fog rolled in and settled around the base of the hill. From the top, it looked like we were on an island in a sea of clouds. We sat in a circle, passing a thermos of cocoa. Suddenly, the ground under us trembled. It felt like a subway train was passing beneath. We stood. The fog swirled, revealing dark shapes moving around the base. Trees we remembered being on one side were now on another. The stars above seemed to shift. "We should go," my friend Alex said. We started down the slope. Halfway, we realized the hill seemed steeper than before. The fog thickened. I could no longer see the parking lot where we'd left our cars. Then we heard laughter, high-pitched, echoing. Figures appeared in the fog. Children, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. They ran around us, hands brushing our arms, faces pale. "Stay," they giggled. "It moves faster when you stay." We bolted, slipping on wet grass. The children followed, their laughter turning to shrieks. At the bottom, we stumbled through the fog and onto gravel. Our cars were parked on the opposite side of the hill than where we'd left them. We drove home in silence. The next day, we returned in daylight. The hill was where it always was, but the sledding tracks were on the opposite slope. My grandfather wasn't surprised. "Sometimes the old ones shift," he said. "That's how the early settlers got lost." He wouldn't elaborate. Now, when I pass that hill, I notice wildflowers growing in different patterns each year. Do you ever feel the ground under you shift in ways you can't see? Chapter 15. The Whispering Well. Behind the remains of a stone farmhouse near our town stands an old well lined with moss-covered stones. When we were kids, we'd stand at its edge and drop pennies, waiting for the faint plunk. Local law said if you leaned over and listened, you could hear whispers from below, voices of those who'd fallen in long ago. Most thought it was just water echoing, but the idea gave the place a thrill. One evening, after a storm, my cousin and I dared each other to listen. I went first. I braced my hands on the slippery stones and leaned over. At first, I heard the faint drip of water hitting water. Then, beneath it, a murmur, like someone speaking from a great distance. I held my breath. The whisper became clearer. It said my name. I jerked back, heart pounding. It knows my name, I told my cousin. He laughed and leaned over. A moment later, his smile faded. He pulled back, eyes wide. It asked me to jump. He whispered. We left quickly. That night, I dreamt of standing at the well, looking down, feeling a gentle tug on my ankles, as if a current were drawing me in. In my dream, I let go and fell endlessly. When I woke, my feet were dirty and wet. My parents thought we'd been playing in puddles. I avoided the well for years. Recently, while researching the area's history for a local blog, I found a newspaper clipping from 1932. It told of a child who fell into the old well. A rescuer went down but never came back up. The article mentioned that when searchers called, they thought they heard voices whispering from the depths, as if an entire crowd were murmuring prayers. The well was capped for a decade. It's open again now. Kids still dropping pennies. Sometimes, when I drive by after rain, I swear I hear faint laughter carried on the wind. If a place calls to you by name, would you answer? Chapter 16. The Vanishing Festival. Every September, our town holds a harvest festival on the green. There are booths with maple candy, quilts, and wood carvings. A pie contest, and a small Ferris wheel. People plan their schedules around it. 2 years ago, the festival never happened. No one noticed until afterward. That's the strange part. We all remember setting up. We remember tasting pies. We remember the band playing. But there is no evidence that it occurred. I was supposed to run the pumpkin carving booth. I remember waking early, packing knives and paint, and driving to the green. I remember unloading pumpkins, the smell of cinnamon in the air, kids in jackets. I remember a woman winning first prize for her apple pie. I remember the mayor giving a speech. As the sun set, the string lights turned on, and the Ferris wheel lights twinkled. At the end of the night, I recall dragging trash bags to the dumpster and shaking hands with the coordinator. The next morning, I walked by the green. It was empty. No tire tracks, no flattened grass, no leftover confetti. I went to the community center to return the knives. The coordinator looked confused. "Why do you have those?" she asked. "We cancelled the festival this year because of the budget shortfall." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She showed me the town's event calendar. The festival had been cancelled months ago. My friend posted on social media about the pie contest. His post had 0 likes or comments. People responded asking what he was talking about. A few of us who remember compared notes. We each recall different details, but all of us agree on the date. We asked the local newspaper. They had no photos, no mention. The police chief shrugged and said we were probably mixing up years. I keep my festival button pinned to my coat as proof. But sometimes I find my coat missing it. Is it possible for an entire event to occur only in people's minds, leaving behind nothing but shared memories and a nagging sense of loss? Chapter 17. The Siren That Sings. The town's emergency siren sits atop a metal tower behind the fire station. It's tested at noon every Saturday. A long, steady wail that we've all learned to ignore. In November of last year, the siren went off at 3 a.m. It started with the usual mechanical pitch, But then the tone shifted. It modulated like a human voice, rising and falling in a melody. The sound was haunting, like someone singing without words. Lights turned on up and down my street. People stepped on the porches, confused. The siren sang for nearly 5 minutes. During that time, I felt compelled to listen. It brought tears to my eyes. I couldn't tell if the melody was sad or beautiful. When it stopped, a chill settled over the town. Phones lit up with texts. People asked if they'd heard it. The fire chief went on the local radio station and apologized, blaming a malfunction in the equipment. He chuckled and said they'd fix it. The next Saturday at noon, the siren tests played the normal tone. People clapped. Then, just as it wound down, the siren's tone slid into the haunting melody again. This time, the notes were lower, like the sound of mourning. Several residents reported feeling dizzy. My neighbor collapsed and was taken to the hospital. The fire department shut off the siren manually. They disconnected the power. At midnight, with no electricity running to it, the siren sang faintly, as if from a great distance. They replaced the siren with a new model. It tests normally now, but sometimes, when the wind is right, late at night, I hear the melody coming from the direction of the old tower. It's softer, but it still makes me ache. I mentioned it to the fire chief. His face went pale. He admitted that the day of the first singing, they had received a call reporting a car accident on the highway. By the time crews arrived, everyone in the car had died. The call came at 2:58 a.m., 2 minutes before the siren sang. Can warnings come in forms we're not prepared to recognize? Chapter 18. The Unsent Letter. When my grandmother passed, she left boxes of letters she'd written throughout her life. Most were between her and friends or family. While sorting them, I found one in an envelope addressed to me. The postmark area was blank, and it hadn't been opened. The handwriting on the front was shaky, as if written in haste. I sat down at her kitchen table and read. "Dear Lily," it began, though my name isn't Lily. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. I need you to promise me you won't go to the old bridge on County Road 12 on the evening of March 6th. No matter who asks you, no matter what you think you see, do not go. If you go, you will not come back. I know because I've seen it." The letter continued with descriptions of a dream. She said she saw a figure standing on the bridge, waving at her. The figure had my face, but older. She waved back and felt compelled to walk toward it. As she stepped onto the bridge, the planks crumbled, and she fell into the river. The water was cold, and hands reached up from below, pulling her under. She woke up gasping. She wrote the letter immediately. She apologized for the strange request and said she loved me. I folded the letter, heart racing. March 6th was a week away. I told my mum. She laughed it off. "Grandma was always superstitious," she said. Still, on March 6th, I stayed home. No one asked me to go to the bridge. At 8 p.m., I got a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice, my voice, said, "Where are you? I need you." I hung up. 10 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. I didn't answer. The knocking stopped. The next day, local news reported that part of County Road 12 had collapsed near the old bridge. They said heavy rain was to blame. I visited my grandmother's grave and thanked her. If you received a warning that seemed outlandish, would you heed it? Chapter 19. The Door in the Basement. When we bought our house, the realtor mentioned the basement was unusual. "It has a door to nowhere," she said, laughing. We thought she meant a closet. On move-in day, I carried boxes down to the basement and saw it. A heavy oak door set into the foundation wall. It was old, with rusted hinges and an iron latch. There was no trim around it, just stone. It was locked. The previous owner left no key. Curious, we tried prying it open. It didn't budge. We knocked. The sound was thick, like knocking on earth. We decided to leave it alone. A few nights later, while folding laundry, I heard a soft thud from the basement. Then another. It sounded like someone knocking back. I went down, heart pounding. The basement was cool and dim. The thudding stopped. I chalked it up to house settling. Weeks passed. Occasionally I heard faint knocks. Once, I pressed my ear to the door. I heard whispering. It was rhythmic, like chanting in a language I couldn't recognize. I bought earplugs. Then, one evening when my partner was out of town, the knocking turned into pounding. The house shook. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The sound stopped abruptly. Then I heard a click. The latch moved. The door creaked open an inch. Cold, stale air flowed out. Beyond the crack, there was only darkness. I slammed it shut and pushed a bookshelf against it. The next morning, the bookshelf had moved several inches away from the door. The door was closed, but the latch hung loose. I called a locksmith to remove the door entirely. He pried it open. Behind it was earth. Packed dirt filled the space, pressed up against the frame. The locksmith looked puzzled. He tapped the earth. It was solid. We sealed the frame with concrete. Occasionally at night, I still hear faint tapping from that wall. Sometimes I dream of digging with my hands, uncovering wooden stairs, descending into a vast hall lined with doors. Have you ever felt like something in your house didn't belong to the house at all? Chapter 20. The midnight train at the crossing. There's an old railroad crossing on the edge of town, tracks rusted and overgrown. Trains haven't run there in decades. The signal lights are gone, leaving only cracked asphalt and wooden planks. Late one night, while driving home, I approached the crossing and saw red lights flashing ahead. Bells dinged clear and loud. The crossing arms descended. I stopped, confused, watching the empty track. A wind picked up, carrying the smell of coal smoke. A whistle echoed in the distance. The ground shuddered. Out of the darkness came the outline of a steam locomotive, black and shining. Its headlamp pierced the night. It moved slowly, its wheels turning silently. As it passed, I saw passengers through the windows of the cars, men in suits, women in hats, all staring straight ahead. Their skin was ashen. None looked at me. The train seemed endless. Just when I thought it would never end, the caboose rolled by. The red lantern swung gently. The crossing arms rose. The bell stopped. I drove home on autopilot. The next day, I returned to the crossing in daylight. No rails, no ties, no signs of recent use. Just weeds. I mentioned the train to my neighbor, an amateur historian. His eyes widened. "You saw the 1147, he said. He told me about a train that derailed a mile down the line in 1931. Dozens died. For years after, people reported seeing the ghost train, always at 11:47 p.m. The crossing arms would lower for a train that existed only in memory. I checked the time on my dashboard the night before. It had been exactly 11:47 when the train appeared. Now, some nights when I can't sleep, I park by the crossing with my headlights off. Sometimes I sit there for hours and see nothing. Once, when I least expected it, I heard the faint ding of bells and smelled coal smoke. If you witnessed a piece of history repeating itself, would you feel honored or terrified? Chapter 21. The Snow Footprints. During a blizzard last January, we lost power. The world outside turned into a white void. To pass the time, I made soup and sat by the window, watching the snow pile up against the porch. By midnight, the storm eased. In the light of the street lamp, the landscape glowed blue. I noticed footprints leading up my driveway. They were bare footprints. No shoe tread, no boot pattern, just toes and arches. They started from the street and went straight to my front door. My heart hammered. I hadn't heard anyone approach. I looked out the peephole. Snow swirled, but no one stood there. I listened. Silence. The footprints were already filling with snow. I called my neighbor across the street. "Did you see anyone go to my door?" I asked. He laughed. "In this weather? No. I haven't even seen you outside." He promised to keep an eye out. I paced, debating whether to open the door. I checked the back door. It was locked. Snow drifted high against it. I went upstairs and looked out the bedroom window. In the backyard, more footprints dotted the snow, coming from the woods and stopping beneath my bedroom window. They circled, as if someone had stood there watching. I clamped down a scream. I took photos with my phone to prove it. In the morning, the footprints had disappeared under fresh snow. I showed the photos to my neighbor. He shrugged. "Probably kids," he said, unconcerned. I enlarged the images. The footprints were small, like a child's, but the gait was off, too far apart for small legs. That night, with the power restored, I dreamed of someone walking barefoot through snow, leaving no heat, no steam, just impressions pressed into the cold. When I woke, there were wet footprints on my hardwood floor, leading from the front door to my bedroom. The locks were still engaged. If something can come to your door without leaving any warmth, can you really keep it out? Chapter 22. The library's whispering aisle. Our town library is housed in a century-old brick building with stained glass windows and a spiral staircase leading to the balcony. When I was a kid, I loved wandering the stacks and pulling down random books. There's one aisle, tucked in the far corner on the second floor, that always made me uneasy. The shelves there are taller, the lighting dimmer. The books are old, leather-bound volumes with brittle pages. On quiet afternoons, when sunlight filtered through dust motes, I'd hear whispers in that aisle. At first, I thought it was the HVAC system, but the whispers were articulate. They sounded like multiple voices murmuring over each other. If I pressed my ear to the spines, I could almost make out words. One day, curiosity got the better of me. I stood at the midpoint of the aisle and whispered, "Hello?" The murmuring paused. Then a chorus of voices responded, perfectly synced. "We hear you." I jumped back, knocking over a stack of books. The whispers chuckled softly. I ran down to the front desk. The librarian looked up. "You were in the far aisle, weren't you?" she asked, half smiling. She explained that the building's original architect believed in energy imprinting. He thought that the knowledge people absorbed from books lingered in the air, saturating the space. In that aisle, the books were from estates of scholars and eccentrics who spent their lives reading. "Sometimes the air talks back," she said. She shrugged as if that were normal. Years later, doing research for a thesis, I returned to the library. I avoided the aisle at first, but one evening when the library was closing, I felt drawn to it. I stood between the shelves. The whispers began. "What are you seeking?" they asked. I whispered my research question. Dozens of murmured suggestions filled the air, listing titles and authors. I followed the guidance and found obscure references that turned out to be exactly what I needed. Before leaving, I whispered, "Thank you." The voices whispered back in unison, "Remember us." Have you ever felt like the places that house knowledge are alive in more ways than one? Chapter 23. The Vanishing Room. When my friends and I were in high school, we loved exploring abandoned buildings. On the outskirts of town stood the skeleton of an old hotel. Its main structure had burned in the 70s, but a side wing remained. One Sunday afternoon, we snuck in through a broken window. Peeling wallpaper hung like skin. Carpets were mildewed. At the end of the hallway, we found a door that was shut tight. On the door was the number 237. The handle turned easily. Inside was a perfectly preserved hotel room, clean bed, mint green walls, fresh flowers on the dresser. The air smelled like lavender. We exchanged looks. Someone had been maintaining this room. There was no dust. The sheets were crisp. I touched the pillow. It was cold. "Maybe someone lives here," my friend whispered. We backed out quietly and closed the door. Our nerves fizzled into giggles as we hurried down the hall. "We have to show someone," we said. We brought my older brother later that day. The door at the end was gone. In its place was a boarded-up wall. No sign of fresh paint, no lavender scent. We searched the entire wing. There was no room 237. My brother rolled his eyes. "You idiots got the wrong hall," he said. We insisted. We returned the next weekend. The hallway looked the same, rot and mold. At the end, the door was back. The brass number plate shone. This time, we took photos. When we opened the door, the room had changed. Faded yellow wallpaper, bed stripped, no flowers. Still, it was intact. We backed out and left. We looked at our photos later. Where we saw a door, the camera showed a wall. Where we saw a green room, the photo showed charred beams. Only our expressions of awe were captured, our hands pointing to nothing. A few years ago, the town demolished the hotel ruins. I drove by as the excavator clawed at the side wing. For a moment, I thought I saw a door, glinting in the sunlight. Then the wall collapsed. Do some spaces exist only when you're willing to see them? Chapter 24. The static on Channel 3. Before streaming, my family had an old TV with a dial. When nothing was on, we'd flip to Channel 3, which was just static. As a kid, I'd stare at the black and white fuzz, seeing patterns in the noise. One night, while my parents were out and the babysitter was on the phone, I sat close to the TV, the volume low. Amidst the hiss, I heard faint music. I leaned closer. It was an old song, scratchy, like from a gramophone. A man's voice crooned something about meeting at midnight. The static shimmered. Images flickered. Blurred faces. A train station. A girl in a white dress. It lasted only seconds. I told the babysitter. She frowned and changed the channel. The next day, I tried again. The static remained static. Years later, during college, I came home to help clean out the basement. The TV was still there. On a whim, I turned it on and dialed to Channel 3. Snow filled the screen. Then, faintly, I heard whispering. It was hard to make out. I recorded it on my phone. When I played it back, the whispers were louder. "Help," they said. "We're in the walls." That night, I dreamed of a house, with walls that were paper thin, voices bleeding through, people trapped between plaster layers, their hands pressed against wallpaper. In the morning, I told my mom. She looked uncomfortable. She admitted that our house was built on the foundation of a boarding house that had burned in the 1950s. Several guests had been unable to escape. The TV static had always bothered her as a kid. She thought she heard voices too. I uploaded the recording to a forum. Someone enhanced the audio and found underlayers of sound. Train whistles. A woman screaming. A calliope. They said I'd tuned into a frequency where past events replay. I'm not sure. The TV stopped working soon after. Sometimes, when I hear white noise, like the hum of a fan or the shower, I catch fragments of music and voices. How much of what we dismiss as noise is actually something trying to be heard? Chapter 25. The dog that knew my childhood dog, Rusty, was a mutt with a keen sense of things. He'd bark before thunderstorms rolled in or sit at the door minutes before my dad's truck turned onto our road. Once, In late autumn, Rusty began acting strangely. He'd sit at the top of the basement stairs, ears up, staring down into the dark. His hackles would rise. He'd whine, then growl. We thought maybe mice had nested. We set traps and checked for drafts. Nothing. A week later, I went down to fetch apple cider. Halfway down the stairs, Rusty bolted past me and stood between me and the basement floor, teeth bared, growl low and constant. I tried to shoo him. He wouldn't budge. I peered past him. In the dim light, I saw a shape near the far wall, a patch of darkness darker than the rest. It moved. It seemed to ripple upward like smoke. Rusty barked, the sound sharp and scared. The shape retreated into the corner and melted into the wall. I ran upstairs, heart pounding, cider forgotten. Rusty followed, pressing against my leg. That night, Rusty refused to leave my room. He whined and paced, ears twitching. Around midnight, I heard a creak from the hallway. Rusty growled. A shadow paused in the doorway. The air turned cold. Rusty lunged, teeth snapping. The shadow recoiled and disappeared. After that, Rusty insisted on sleeping in front of my bedroom door. We never saw the shadow again. Years later, after Rusty passed away, I inherited the house. I adopted a new dog, Penny. One evening, Penny sat at the top of the basement stairs, ears up, just like Rusty had. My stomach dropped. I remembered the shape. I turned on the basement lights. Nothing moved. Penny yawned and trotted away. Maybe Rusty chased it off for good. Sometimes, when I see Penny tilt her head at an empty corner, I whisper a quiet thanks to Rusty. Do animals see what we can't and protect us without us ever knowing? Chapter 26. The time slip at the diner. There's a 24-hour diner on the highway that looks like it hasn't changed since the 50s. Neon sign flickering, chrome stools, red vinyl booths. Truckers, students, and insomniacs all stop there. Last spring, I pulled in around 2 a.m. after a long drive. The parking lot was empty. Inside, a man in a crisp white apron wiped the counter. The jukebox in the corner played a soft doo-wop tune. I took a seat and ordered coffee. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with teased hair, smiled and poured a cup. Her uniform looked vintage, down to the brooch pinned at her collar. I glanced around. Everything looked period accurate. No credit card machine, no digital displays. A few other customers sat in booths, all dressed in clothes that would be considered retro today. They chatted quietly. I sipped my coffee. It tasted different. Rich and slightly bitter, like my grandmother's. My phone had no service. The clock above the counter read 1:15, hands ticking backwards. Feeling uneasy, I asked the waitress what time they closed. She laughed. "Honey, we're always open," she said. The song on the jukebox changed to an Elvis tune. I dug for my wallet to pay. The bills in my pocket looked old. Presidents' faces larger, paper thicker. Panic prickled my skin. I stood and headed for the door. As I passed a booth, a man in a fedora looked up and met my eyes. His expression was identical to mine, fear and realization. He mouthed, "Run." I pushed through the door. Cold air hit me. I stumbled to my car, heart racing. The parking lot was full of modern vehicles. A fluorescent open sign buzzed above the glass door. I looked back. Through the diner windows, I saw bright LED lights and a digital menu board. The waitress behind the counter was a teenager scrolling on her phone. I checked the time. It was 3:07 a.m. My receipt from the register read 1:15 a.m., and the coffee cost 25 cents. If you accidentally stepped into another time, would you even notice? Until something felt off. Chapter 27. The Orchard's Scent. Every fall, my family visited an orchard at the edge of town. Rows of apple trees stretched across rolling hills, their leaves turning red and gold. You could smell the cider donuts frying from the gravel parking lot. One October, while wandering between rows, I caught a scent that didn't belong, sweet and heavy, like lilacs in spring. It drifted on the breeze and seemed to beckon. I followed it, leaving the main path. The scent grew stronger. I found myself in a part of the orchard I'd never seen. The trees were older here, their branches twisted. A wooden fence, half rotted, bordered the area. Beyond it, a meadow opened, wildflowers swaying. In the center stood a single tree covered in white blossoms. It wasn't apple season for blossoms. The fragrance was intoxicating. I climbed over the fence and approached. The petals were delicate, almost translucent. I reached out to touch one. A voice behind me said, "Don't." I turned. An elderly woman stood by the fence, her face lined like the bark of a tree. She wore a brown dress and a wide-brimmed hat. "That tree isn't for picking," she said softly. "It's planted over a grave. Smells nice, doesn't it? That's how it lures folks." She told me a story of a girl who died in the orchard in the 1920s, caught in machinery. Her parents buried her there and planted a flowering tree. For years, people reported the scent of flowers leading them to the spot. Anyone who took a blossom home found their house filled with the smell, overpowering and cloying, and they would dream of being trapped among roots. I apologized and backed away. The woman watched me until I was over the fence. When I returned to the main path, I turned around. The meadow was gone. Just rows of apple trees stretching to the horizon. I never smelled the scent again. Sometimes, when I pass the orchard on a crisp autumn morning, the air smells faintly of lilacs, and I see a white glint deep among the trees. Can a place mourn long after everyone else has forgotten? Chapter 28. The Hitchhiker on Route 5. Driving down Route 5, late at night, you sometimes see her. The first time I saw her was after a late shift. Rain streaked the windshield, wipers struggling. A figure stood on the shoulder, thumb out. I slowed. She wore jeans and a light jacket despite the chill. Her hair was dark and hung in a curtain. I rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked. She nodded. Her face was pale, eyes shadowed. "Hop in," I said, unlocking the door. She slid into the passenger seat without speaking. Water dripped from her hair onto the upholstery. I glanced at her. Her clothes were dry. "Where are you headed?" I asked. She pointed straight ahead. "Just down the road," she whispered. Her voice was hollow. We drove in silence for a mile. Suddenly, she said, "Stop here." We were near a row of old mailboxes by a driveway leading into darkness. I pulled over. She opened the door and stepped out, then leaned back in. "Tell them to stop," she whispered. "Tell them to slow down." Then she shut the door. I looked down to adjust the radio. When I looked up, she was gone. Curious, I looked down the driveway. It led to a farmhouse with no lights on. I drove home. The next day, I mentioned the hitchhiker at work. An older colleague paled. He told me that 50 years ago, a young woman was killed at that spot, hit by a speeding car. Since then, drivers have reported seeing her. She asks for a ride, then warns them. Some say if you ignore her and keep driving, you'll see flashing lights in your rear-view mirror. A cop pulling you over for speeding. Others say if you stop, your speedometer needle freezes below the limit, no matter how hard you press the gas. I've seen her twice since. Each time she looks the same. I always stop and listen. I always slow down. Do you ever feel that the past reaches out to touch the present, trying to prevent the same story from repeating? Chapter 29. The Hospital's Night Shift. During my first job as an orderly at the county hospital, I worked the night shift. The fluorescent lights hummed and the halls were quiet except for the occasional beeping monitor. The hospital had an older wing unused for patients, slated for renovation. We stored equipment there. On one 2 a.m. errand, I wheeled a cart of supplies down the hall toward that wing. As I passed room 6, I heard muffled conversation. The room was supposed to be empty. I peeked in. Moonlight spilled through blinds onto empty beds. The voices continued, soft, conversational. I stepped inside. The air was cold. "Hello?" I whispered. The conversation paused. Then slowly, a chair scraped across the linoleum. I backed out and shut the door. Heart racing. I told a nurse. She sighed. "They talk sometimes," she said. "Leave them be." She told me that years ago. That room housed long-term coma patients. The hospital moved them before renovations, but sometimes staff still heard their voices. Another night, walking past room 12, I heard laughter. Children's laughter. That room had been the pediatric ward before the new wing was built. A ball rolled into the hallway, stopping at my feet. It was old, rubber-faded. I left it. Later, the head nurse showed me a photo album of the hospital in the 70s. In one picture, I recognized room 12. It was decorated with cartoon animals. In the corner of the photo, a ball identical to the one in the hall sat by a chair. On my last week, I saw a woman in a white gown in the old wing. She stood at the end of the hall, her back to me. I thought she was a lost patient. "Mom?" I called. She turned. Her face was kind, but blurred, like a photograph out of focus. She nodded as if acknowledging me, then walked through a closed door and disappeared. When I told my supervisor, she just said, "She's probably checking on her old room." Working nights changed how I think about places that were once full of life and are now quiet. Are echoes of care and worry so strong that they linger when the people have long gone? Chapter 30. The Last Daylight. A few winters ago, the sun set early, as it does in Vermont. But one particular day, it didn't rise at all. People woke to a grey twilight that never brightened. The weather forecast had called for clear skies, but the light remained dim. Schools stayed open. Cars turned on their headlights. As noon approached and the sky still looked like dawn, unease spread. Birds were silent. The temperature dropped sharply. At work, the office felt like late evening. Computer screens were the brightest sources of light. Co-workers whispered and checked their phones for news. Social media buzzed with speculation. Volcanic eruptions, solar flares, scientific experiments gone wrong. The official channel said nothing was wrong. By mid-afternoon, a strange glow appeared at the horizon. Not from the sun, but from behind the mountains. An amber band that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. The sky above the glow was dark purple. People stepped outside, drawn to the light. It seemed to hum. My neighbor said he felt dizzy. Someone collapsed. The glow brightened and then receded, as if whatever made it had decided against something. Within an hour, the sky lightened and the sun finally rose, sliding into view as if nothing had happened. Radios crackled with relieved voices. The temperature climbed back to normal. By evening, most people laughed about it. That night, I received a group text from friends. All it contained was a photo taken during the dim day. It showed the amber glow at the horizon. In the foreground, silhouetted against it, were tall, thin figures, dozens of them standing on the ridge. Their arms were raised. The photo vanished from my phone moments later. No one else seemed to have received it. When I asked my friends, they stared blankly. "What photo?" they asked. Sometimes, on cloudy days, when the sun takes a bit longer to rise, I watch the horizon and wonder if someone or something is waiting for us to stop paying attention. If the world gave you a warning hidden in an anomaly, would you notice in time?